Virtually every leader in the health freedom movement talks about the insecurity of the food supply as one of the primary avenues of tyranny. Our family has rigorously sourced our foods for over a decade, and one of our favorite sources is Farm Match. And specifically, if you are in San Diego, Real Food Club PMA. My kids are literally made from their maple breakfast sausage and the amazing carnitas we make from their pasture-raised pork. But from regeneratively raised raw dairy products to the organic potato chips made in regenerative lard, or anything you might get at your local farmer's market, our family's overall wellness and the security of our food lies in the hands of Farm Match and Real Food Club. I am so excited to be sharing about Farm Match and Real Food Club to offer Future Generations podcast listeners 10% off your first order. You can find the code and link in the show notes. Enjoy the rest of the show. Love and appreciate you all. The desire to go off-grid and disconnect from the system was one of the single most important initiatives any household could have. Whether it is growing our own food, becoming sovereign in our energy production and usage, establishing alternative communication strategies, or digging a well and finding the infinity of primary water. About a year and a half ago, our family moved into our new home in North County, San Diego on 3 acres of precious land here in America's finest county. One of the first things we did was hire Food Forest Abundance to design a regenerative layout for our land. From the different trees to plant differing berry guilds and synergistic pollinators, to consulting on alternative energy, collecting our rainwater, and even helping us find our local well guy, Food Forest Abundance and their Freedom Farm Academy has been pivotal in the gradual and consistent evolution of our household towards true sovereignty from the system. They have helped us simplify a very confusing process and helped us create the design of our dreams. It doesn't matter if you have 3 acres, dozens or hundreds, or just a small yard. Food Forest Abundance has something to offer you and your family in your journey to move your entire household off-grid. Use the code TheFutureGen to work with the absolute best in the world, Food Forest Abundance, to create your own freedom farm and get off-grid at a discounted rate. Welcome to another episode of the Future Generations podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Stanton Hom, and this episode is with our mayor of Escondido, Dane White. And I know how you know. I know you know how I feel about politicians. I know you know how I feel about politics, and I know you know how I feel about the infrastructure of the many aspects of the slave system that is the federal government, that is virtually all forms of government. But I think you also know how I care deeply about local government and local involvement. And the fact that this man is a leader in my kid's hometown, and the fact that this man is 5 generations in this town. His family has, they essentially came to Escondido in the late 1800s. Apparently his family has roots all the way back to the Mayflower, which so does my wife, which is very interesting because 102 people came over on the Mayflower. So how there's that type of connection, and there is remarkable. But Dane White took office essentially as we were moving to San Diego, or moving to Escondido. He had kind of heard about who we are, came by the office, gave us a mayoral proclamation, whispered in my ears some secrets about his choices over the last several years, especially in this county, that kind of helped us realize that we were allies and that we believed many of the same things. And I've since watched him grow an amazing office and an amazing campaign, and put his money where his mouth is, and actually do the thing that he campaigned about, which was pure grassroots. Which, as he shared, you know, he has very strong perspectives about taxation being theft and all sorts of things that we absolutely believe in terms of Second Amendment rights and things like that. This conversation I knew was going to be great, but it was far better than I thought it was going to be. And at the end of the day, I am so incredibly blessed that he shared with us. And I can't wait to see how you feel about this interview, because you might be here local with us in Escondido, you might be in North County, you might be in San Diego, you might be in California, you might be in Texas and Florida and Idaho and Montana and all the amazing free places, right? And what I would encourage to you, whether you are fighting the cartel like we were down south in central San Diego, or if you are in a place like you are, like we are now, where he shared how conservative their city council is, how the school board is, that it's when you get preventative, it's when you get proactive, it's when you build relationships, it's when you put into place initiatives that are actually future generations ensuring that so many of the principles that you live and abide by are actually coming through and coming to fruition and making way, because you are making relationships not just when things are shit and the shit's hitting the fan, but you're making relationships when things are actually moving in a great direction. This man is a great leader. He's a great man. He's a great father. He's a great husband. And that's something that we, both believe as key to living in a great life. Thank you, Mayor White, for sharing with us. Very grateful for your time, your expertise, and your heart. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Love and appreciate you all. Welcome to the Future Generations podcast, providing you with the world-changing content necessary to inspire you, your family, and our planet to a life of optimal health potential. We'll help you make the choices that powerfully influence the lives you bring into this world. It's time to strengthen our resolve, do better now, and for our future generations. I'm your host, Dr. Stanton Hom. Okay, welcome to another episode of the Future Generations podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Stanton Hom, and this episode is taking a slightly different spin. If you know me, you know that I don't have a ton of faith in governmental leaders, and then we were very strategically, apparently, a part of a trend in San Diego County where a lot of young families are kind of pushing into the Northeast County area. And I started to do a bit of research on homes, started to do a bit of research on virtually all the things that young parents would do. And something that, we thought was unique about moving up to Escondido was there was this new mayor that was running for office that there was a something that doesn't happen that often in big metropolitans like San Diego County, like a lot of grassroots. And a lot of very, very people-focused campaigning. And Mayor Dane White, I'm very grateful to call you a friend. I'm very grateful to call you an ally in this part of the county, especially knowing what we've done over the last several years as an organization. And it was awesome to meet you in person. It was awesome also to just kind of follow your campaign and follow you up until just a couple weeks ago. We were at a networking event, and you're just like, hey, man, everything's great. And it's awesome to see that because a lot of politicians are already burnt out. They look 10 years older. But Mayor Dane White, I would love for you to introduce yourself to our podcast. I'd love our audience to get to know you both personally and professionally.
Awesome. Thank you. To your last statement, I will say I have more gray hair in my beard than I ever did before, but at 34, I don't know if you're supposed to have that, but it is what it is.
That's awesome.
No, thank you for the introduction. I'm a lifelong resident of Escondido. My family actually moved here in the late 1800s,
That's
right
crazy.
around the time the city was incorporated. Fifth generation. I have two kids here. My wife is a high school special education teacher, and I grew up here for the most part. I was a bit of a troublemaker. My parents sent me to boarding school when I was 14 or 15 out in Stockton, Missouri, to an independent fundamentalist Baptist boarding school.
Wow.
And after, long story short, after a year and a half, I got sick of being there. So I ran away. I was actually on all the missing kids boards in Escondido for several months. Made it all the way from
Wow.
I was on a home visit when I ran away. After 18 months, I got to come home for a week. I ran away, made it all the way to a very, very tiny town in Utah where my grandpa lived. He took me in for several months. And then when it was time to finish my senior year of high school, we actually called my family and admitted where I was. And he took control of me legally, and rinse and repeat. Found the troublemakers, got into drugs and alcohol. I managed to finish high school by the skin of my teeth, but shortly after I was arrested, taken to juvenile hall, and then from there placed in a foster home. And then once I graduated from foster care, was kind of in and out of jail, in and out of rehab, until I moved back to Escondido when I was 21 and went to rehab here. 6 months later, I was clean and sober, ended up meeting my wife. The girl is now my wife. We dated the entire 2 years that I served my mission for the Mormon church out in the Midwest. And then came home, got married 6 weeks later, ran for school board when I was 24 or 25, something like that.
Wow.
Won my first race then, won re-election. I actually won re-election with like 75% of the vote. And
Wow.
then 2 years into my second term, decided to throw my hat in the ring for mayor.
Wow. That's incredible. It's literally one of my favorite conversations. And thank you for being so open and transparent, because I have a fundamental belief that void equals value. Like the things that you go through have the seeds and the potential for, this radical transformation.
I would
that
say
I
too,
believe
bro.
you
I don't
go
mean to
for it.
interrupt you, but for a
No, not at all.
politician, you kind of have two routes. You can try to create your image
Hmm.
and mold that into what you want the public's perception to be, or you can just embrace who you are and your
Yeah.
past. If you're like me, in and out of jail, in rehab, it is what it is. You've got to bring those things to light. And for some people, it brings an incredible amount of faith in me, and for others, they judge you for it. But whatever, it is what it is.
And it's one of my favorite mentors mentioned to me early on. He said, one of the most powerful, it was a men's group. One of the most powerful men in the room are the ones that have nothing to hide, and it's very rare to find politicians who don't have 50,000 skeletons in their closet that they're trying to use all their public PR and all the people trying to hide all those different types of things. And then when you lead with it and you have that focus with your specific campaign, and then you've kind of led that way throughout your campaign, I think that's why you can say at the end of the day, it's been awesome, man, because you've actually just led with a lot of that integrity that most people never even try to do, right? You shared something really awesome, and this is something that I remember. One of my favorite businesses that does not exist downtown currently, coffee, back in the back wall of the Chittick's old coffee shop was an image of downtown Escondido from the late 1800s, and it was like a horse and carriage. You could see the bank building. You can see the tower that is downtown even today. And I will say that it's how I live. I live very much tribally. That's how I was kind of raised and brought up. But I never found that anywhere else I lived. And then as soon as we moved our practice here, our office here, we were meeting people that are like, yeah, I have 3 generations here. Yeah, we have 4 generations here. Yeah, somebody would come in, somebody else would come in, somebody else would come in and be like, weird. We all went to elementary school together and they all didn't know that they were coming. And it was just this community focused thing. I'd love for you to kind of maybe chime in a little bit more about that, because that's not really heard of in California.
So I don't think a lot of people realize that Escondido is the 4th largest city in San Diego County with 150,000 residents, 170 if you include the unincorporated areas.
Of course.
But very, very much a small town vibe. We're like an old farming community, and everybody knows everybody. And it was interesting during the campaign. I would have people message me on Facebook and be like, "Do you remember me? We went to 4th grade together, or we played soccer together, football together." And then I had literally dozens of people reach out to me and say, "I know your dad from North County Yamaha. I've been buying motorcycles from him for 20 years." And it's very much like that. Everybody that I know who has been here forever is proud to be here. We have our issues like everybody else. There's definitely some homelessness, there's drugs, there's gangs. We have plenty to complain about, but I think what we have to offer far outweighs any of that.
Could you share a little bit more about that that journey you had, essentially seeing life through the lens of so much challenge, and then also maybe reflecting on how that is? Because I've seen a couple of your posts, I've seen a couple of your articles addressing homelessness, and also addressing it from a fact that you've kind of navigated that to some degree in your life. I would love for you to share a little bit about that.
It's interesting. So I did an interview for ABC the other day, and the interview was about the new regulations we put in to enforce encampment bans. And he asked me, with a bit of hindsight, what would you have thought when you were homeless about what you're trying to do now? And I said, back then I would have thought it was cruel and, insensitive and all those things. Now I realize that the people who had this immense amount of tough love for me were the ones who truly cared.
Wow.
And for me, there's different with homelessness specifically. I think there's different degrees, right? There's what you see every day on the streets. There's people like me. I spent nights on the street. I slept behind the 7-Eleven on the corner of Country Club and Center
Wow.
City. But I knew how to leverage resources and relationships. I spent a lot of nights in someone's garage or couch and kind of going back and forth from here to Southern Utah, kind of wherever I could get the most out of everybody else. And back then, I blamed everybody else for all of my problems. And I think I had good
Wow.
reasons, right? My family life was a mess. My parents at that time had already been through 5 marriages. Um, I was bullied in school as a kid, just all kinds of things that were wrong. But at some point, you've got to pivot and realize, despite all of that, and a lot of these people that are on the streets in Escondido have faced way worse things than me. Despite that, the only one who can fix it is you. And that's the approach
Wow.
I took was, nobody's going to get me out of this mess but myself. And it's going to take a
Wow.
lot of work. And the more effort you put in, the more other people are willing to contribute and give you a hand up. And that's been my experience, for the last several years.
That's awesome. I really appreciate you sharing that because it's often so politicized and it's often, very polarized where, and then we could say the same, which I kind of wanted you to chime in a little bit too, even though we're Northeast County. I mean, San Diego's got a really big border challenge right now. And we're seeing videos literally every week with I can't imagine jet skis coming up onto the shores,
Just saw that.
but I've seen, Jim Desmond talk about it. Obviously, we see, the kind of the liberal side and the perspective is just very interesting, to kind of approach. I'm hearing from, Amy Reichert and a lot of the people who are actually doing a ton of research on the border. And I'm curious if you could chime in a little bit about that border issue and how that affects, particularly where we are, even though we're in the northeastern part of San Diego County, it's a huge county issue right now.
It is. I don't know if you remember a while back, the county, when they were first considering opening up that migrant center.
Mm-hmm.
And at that same time, I was down at the border with Congressman Darrell Issa and a bunch of other mayors, kind of getting a firsthand look. And that's when I realized what was really wrong. So when we were taking the tour, we were driving along the border, and one of the agents said, "Yeah, there's a hole in the wall that they're coming through." And I imagined like a cut hole in the wall. And when we got there, oh no, it's like 300 feet that's just missing entirely. And we're
Wow.
standing there talking, and people are walking through, and Border Patrol's just like, "Hey, you got to keep walking about 2 miles and you'll end up here." But what I'm trying to say is when the county was deliberating about that migrant center, it was like, so I am, just so everyone's aware, I am staunchly like, taxation is theft. You should be able to keep every penny you earn. You shouldn't be taking public dollars and spending it on a migrant center. But that's not the world we live in. And I was
Right.
looking at this situation, and I'm looking at cities like in New York or in Chicago, where they have tens, if not hundreds of thousands of migrants that have taken over schools and hotels and everything else. And I came to the realization that although I hate they're spending our money on that migrant center, I would rather have them stop there for a temporary period of time and then go somewhere else, because I'm looking at what's happening in these other cities and the
Right.
damage that it's cost and the resources that it's taking. And we can't afford that in a city like Escondido.
Right.
So we don't see a ton of people getting dropped off here. In fact, I'm not aware of really any being dropped off here, but it affects everybody because the county's tax dollars, those are our tax dollars, even if we're not in the unincorporated area.
Right. It's I think that I grew up. I'm a little older than you, so I remember watching the movie Born in East LA growing up. It was Cheech and Chong, and you like learn these things, right? You learn these things about like borders and immigration. Like my family is obviously, they're immigrants, right? My dad's side immigrated in 1940s. 5 men came over, left their wives in China, fought for World War II, and largely just ended their lives super patriotic, like handing me American Legion magazines until like they passed, my grandfather. On my mom's side, they immigrated in 1960. And I remember distinctly being, a child, like under maybe 7 or 8 years old, and remembering my grandmother getting her citizenship because she was, who is Abraham Lincoln? Like she was taking the test and like passed,
Yeah.
like it was this thing. It was this thing that she was mentally preparing for, and her learning the English language, which, she did. My maternal grandfather never did, and it's like it was this moment in time where they're like, we made it, like we're an American citizen, and then watching, as they got older, like these, I don't know, a lot of people don't know about this, but there are these birthing centers in LA that Chinese women are essentially moved into to birth babies that become American citizens. But then a lot of these 2 generations ahead, they then bring the grandparents over, bring all the money over under different names, and then the grandparents live off of SSI and all sorts of crazy things. And meanwhile, they're best friends with my grandparents, and my grandparents have done everything, quote, right. And these other, populations are literally, not even figuratively, stealing from the government and essentially taking advantage of our situation, which is no different than what's happening, right? A 300-foot hole is not a hole. Like it's a complete, like it's a breach.
Yeah.
And it's not something you sneak through. It's just open.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
With Border Patrol standing there guiding you on where to go. And, I have my dad's side. There's some evidence that we came over on the Mayflower, making us a type of immigrant.
Oh, that's so interesting. So
on
is
the flip side,
my wife's side.
My mom's grandparents came here from Italy, stopped in New Jersey, and ended up in Escondido and didn't speak a lick of English. And that's how my mom's side ended up here. So, yeah, there's definitely a right way and a wrong way. But I just saw a photo yesterday on Twitter of a receipt that a migrant had left at a grocery store, I think in New York, and the cashier posted their food stamp balance of $14,000. And when I see that, when my wife and I were newly married, I had lost my job temporarily, and I applied for food stamps, and we got denied because my wife made $18 an hour as a teacher's aide. It was too much money. Wow, man. And it's not just the fact that we're spending the money; it's we're not giving it to the citizens who need it. But on top of that, I just posted on Twitter this morning, our federal government goes into the national debt increases by $75,000 every second.
Wow.
So at what point is this going to break?
Right. I think it's broken.
Yeah. Yeah. It's held together by popsicle sticks at the moment.
I think it's pretty, I did not know this, but so my wife's side of the family, her side of the family also has descendants from the Mayflower. And
Incredible.
I didn't know this. Like I never looked it up. I don't know how big ships are, but I just Googled it and it's like 102 Mayflower passengers. Like that's crazy that you have essential descendants there. And then my family does too. That's so wild. That's mind blowing. How would you, I think we're talking around several of them, but I'm curious if you could verbalize like what you would say is like the biggest challenge we face today. I know it's a loaded question. Level? I would say just what comes to you, what comes to your heart, given things that we've talked about. So
I'll give you the two things that my mind goes back and forth on. I think the nation is facing a major identity crisis.
Wow.
Nobody knows who they are, where they came from, what they stand for, why they're here, and they want to be a part of something so badly that it's just kind of the first group that accepts them the way that they are, and that's not good for anybody. And the other side of that, I think the thing with the biggest consequences that's facing America today is the national debt. And no politicians are talking about that. In fact, both sides are just content spending us into oblivion. And at some point, we're going to have to answer for that.
Yeah, it's $75,000 a second, a minute, a second. Like that's, since you said that, that's seven figures. Since you said that,
I think it took something like 150 years or more to accumulate the first $1 trillion of debt, and now we add another $1 trillion every 3 months.
Wow, man. Could you maybe expand upon that first half, the identity crisis? I would agree with you 1,000%, but I'd love to know what you have behind that.
Man, I look at myself and I look at myself in high school, wanting to be liked so badly, wanting to be a part of something. And my family situation was broken. I just didn't know who I was or what my purpose was in this life. And I didn't even have direction to go. And when I found what happened was I actually had a kind of a mental breakdown 3 months into rehab because this was the first time that I had taken life serious. I did everything that they told me. I stopped using drugs. I stopped smoking cigarettes, stopped drinking alcohol, changed my phone number, ditched all my friends, got a job, and I was more miserable than I had ever been in my entire life. And to make a long story short, I had this breakdown to my mom, who at the time was letting me sleep on a futon in her garage. And she was like, look, if you want to quit rehab, that's up to you. It's your choice. But I think you should say a prayer. I think you should be very specific about what you want, and then
Wow.
you should go from there. And I said a prayer. I said I wanted new friends. I wanted friends that would ride bikes with me because I'm big into cycling and motocross. And I wanted a new girlfriend. And within like 3 weeks, I had new friends that all rode bikes and met the girl who is now my wife. And really, what introduced me to all three is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And
Wow.
they also, I just think, getting with those people and going in the direction that they were headed set me in the direction that I'm headed now. And I knew there was more to life. I knew I wanted to be a part of something bigger than myself. And I have found all those things, but it took so much work. And it was a miserable and painful experience that I think some people are just so beaten down in life for whatever their job, there's whatever circumstances that first bit of struggle is enough to wear them down and break them, and they don't keep
Wow.
going. And
Wow.
so I think it's kind of put us in this mess we're in today.
What made you, in those depths, keep going?
I think so I wasn't going through it alone.
Yeah.
At that point, I had some friends I could rely on and spend time with. I started cultivating this relationship with my wife. And really, before I even met my wife, I was friends with her dad, who has become a mentor of mine, who is one of the best men that I've ever known. And
Okay.
having that, somebody to keep me accountable, somebody to forgive me when I tripped and help
Wow.
me back up, is I think the primary drivers of that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. It's I would agree with you 100%. We're at an identity crisis. I think it's partially fabricated, right? Not fabricated that it's fake, but orchestrated, because I believe that. And I always say it like I use different frames for it. I call them the mafia. I call them the cartel, but I call them the people behind the industries, pulling the puppet strings. I think they create these things. They create these opportunities that create these camps and these factions that people in their dark places, they get drawn into whatever identity it is. And then all of a sudden they're marionettes, right? They're being literally pulled by how the media is moving them, how industries are moving them, how pharma is moving them. And it's crazy. It's crazy because in the end, there's only one winner, and it's the people behind the people, behind the people, behind the people, behind the industries, behind the people, right?
And then
It's
telling
crazy.
everybody that you should accept yourself the way that you are. You're good enough the way that you are. And that is the biggest lie in the world. None of us
Wow.
ever as good as we can
Wow.
be. And I think the second you stop pursuing your better self, you're going to end up lost. I'm my wife, I am never good enough for my wife. And
Wow.
I have to keep improving for her and for my two girls and for myself. And I'm never fine just the way I am. There's always something to critique and there's always something to get better at.
That's so crazy. I said that the other day, and it's something that I just said it reflexively. I can't remember where it was. Maybe it's the dad's group that I'm in right now. And it was something very similar, where it's like a mantra in my mind where I wake up knowing that I have to earn them every day, my wife and my kids, every single day. And I think you're flying in the face with a lot of self-help perspectives today, right? Love yourself. And not to say that you don't, not to say that I don't have self-love, not to say that I don't believe in myself. It's just to say you're speaking to something that I think is how my grandfather, under the age of 20, can leave his wife in China, come to the United States with his dad and his father-in-law and his, older brother and his brother-in-law, and be like, I think we could start a life here. Like, that's mind-blowing to me. Like, I would never even contemplate going to another country, obviously, because we have the best country in the world. But obviously, like, it's crazy that that's so countercultural today.
It's so crazy. I read to my girls every night, and we're reading through the Laura Ingalls Wilder books. And I don't know if you know what those are, but there's the part we're on right now. They're actually moving to Kansas from wherever they were, Iowa or something like that. But they're traveling in a wagon and crossing creeks and doing all this stuff. And I'm trying to tell my kids, it's impossible to comprehend what that was like and what that struggle was like, because, right now we just get in the car and go somewhere, and we have the air conditioner and music, and we don't have to cross a river in a wagon with horses. And so I can't fathom my family coming from Italy at that time, or your family from China, but the sacrifices that they made for you and I to live this life we're having now, I think you and I owe it to them.
Wow.
To keep going.
Wow. That's, I think we're speaking the exact same language. And what's funny, fun fact, my wife just went to a thrift store with my kids. It's their fun thing to do. I can't remember which one what it's called, but it's this massive store on East Valley. And
I know what you're talking about.
They picked up the Laura Ingalls Wilder book.
They're awesome.
And it's the first one that we've owned. And it's like, it's so funny. It's so funny. There's so many little synchronicities. What would you say void equals value? I would love to know, with all the things that you see, all the things that you've been through, all the challenge, if you could verbalize a big part of your mission today, what would you characterize it as?
So there's a newspaper back there on my table, and I'm on the front page, and it's when they're swearing me in. And one of the things I said when I was being sworn in was that my goal is to leave Escondido better than I found it. And that's what they put on the cover. It's so cool. But I think that's my mission today, is just to make sure that every person that I interact with, every, concern that comes up in the community somehow either gets resolved, the situation gets better. That's my goal, is just to make things better. My life, my kids' life, my wife's life.
So many people have asked me what I do to stay mentally and physically resilient in the midst of the unending polarization, fear, and tyranny. Literally nothing has made a bigger impact for me than daily cold plunging. 3 minutes, 37 degrees every morning for over a year now. My friends, I wanted to tell you about the Edge Tub from Edge 30 Labs. Their portable and inflatable tub can alternate between an ice bath and hot tub. I've been regenerating the benefits of cold plunging every day, like better sleep, better focus, and more energy. We have had some really amazing interviews to learn more about cold exposure. But in the meantime, I invite you to check out Edge 30 Labs website to learn more. I'm also happy to share an exclusive offer for Future Generations podcast listeners, $150 off using the code TheFutureGen. You can find more info in the show notes. Get cold. What's up, FG fam? One of the single best companies whose products have supported the optimal wellness of our family for years is Earthly Wellness. Kate TG and her team have stood for truth, health, and freedom in ways that paved the way for so many of us. They experienced heavy levels of censorship long before it was popularized, and they stood strong and persevered. Their products are clean, cost-effective, and honestly, they work for all ages. From supporting my wife, our oldest, and our little guy, Earthly Wellness provides products that have been foundational for our family for years. We especially use their products right before bedtime. Their Feel Better Fast and other herbal tinctures are some of the best in the world, as well as their amazing Goodnight Lotion, the magnesium oil, are mainstays. I am so excited to be partnering with Earthly to offer future generations podcast listeners 10% off your first purchase. You can find the code link in the show notes. Enjoy the rest of the show. Love and appreciate you all. I love that. And I think that's a very just foundational principle that if everybody lived by, the world would just be a better place. And I feel like I want you to maybe qualify a little bit more, because we had conversations, and I don't want to share all the conversations we've had, because you've shared some things with me that I'm like, yes, a political leader that believes this, right? I would love to know, as a mayor, and maybe interfacing with the other mayors, right, in this county, because there are pockets of incredible Americans in San Diego. It doesn't seem to be the majority because of the cartel, right? The World Economic Forum people that run the county supervisors, right? But I'm curious about the intrusion of things like, we talked about this a little bit before as we moved up here, like things like surveillance, things like cameras, and things like, like those 15-minute CDs, like down in San Diego where we got kicked out of our office. The office is still there, by the way. Like, they kicked us out, gave us 90 days. They made us leave. They said there's going to be a big development project. They've since emaciated the entire Bankers Hill area. All the old mom and pop restaurants we used to go to, all the small shopping centers are just completely dug out. There's going to be high rises, and they're making downtown San Diego essentially that, right? They spent 3 years doing construction for 2 bike lanes. And I remember,
It probably cost $30 million.
It was, I think, $27 million. And I remember just standing out there, because my office was there for 8 years, and maybe 3 bikes in the last 2 years, 3 years that we were there. And I think one of the 3 I know, because it was a patient who was riding one of those scooters and fell off, and he came in, he was like, dude, I fell off a scooter right outside the office. But my question is how real is that? Do you experience that? Do you experience pressure from that? And what has that been like for you, knowing that if you look at Escondido, there's so many old routes, there's so much longevity?
I can answer that in 2 parts. I'll start with the surveillance first. I was on the Escondido Creek Trail. My backyard fence is the Escondido Creek Trail, and I was walking one night, and I happened to get to the intersection of Midway, and I look up, and there's a camera pointed in my face. And I was like, what the heck is this about? So the next day I emailed the city manager. I was like, hey, I want to know where all the cameras are, who has access to them and who can control them. Where do we store the data? How long do we store it for? Who has access to the data? And the end goal of that is going to be, I'm going to eventually start a public safety commission, and it's going to encompass a bunch of things. Like, I want to have quarterly meetings on emergency preparedness. Everybody in the city should have at least a 72-hour kit and all that stuff. From that to, the city needs policy on how we use data and how we use surveillance cameras and all of those kinds of things. The only reason that hasn't already been done is we have some major financial issues here. Those commissions do take a significant amount of staff time, and I'm just patiently waiting until we finish up with another one I'm working on, and that one will close, and I'll open this one. But you're familiar with SANDAG, the San Diego Association of Governments.
Oh, yeah.
And it's our regional transportation agency. And every county has one of these. But what they really are transportation and climate agencies.
Oh.
And, if you do a Google search, I would encourage you and everybody else to do this later. Google 2 words, SANDAG, United Nations, and see what comes up. See what kind of relationships we have with them, what contracts have been signed. And it's funny, there's a group that, I call them the crazies. I hope they don't take offense to that, because I actually agree with everything that they're saying for the most part. But, 6 to 8 people who show up to every meeting and comment on every item. And they're constantly talking about, Agenda 30 and the World Economic Forum and how we're implementing that through SANDAG. And it is all true. It's absolutely true. And what happens is they use climate to implement all of this nonsense transportation that in the end, it's not meant to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions. What it's meant to do is get you out of your car and into public transit where they can control your movements even more.
Wow.
They want to limit where you can go and when you can go, and at a cost of just here's what's crazy. You mentioned bike lanes.
This is
In
awesome.
in
I
the
love
last
this. Sorry.
in the last Sandag meeting, there was an item to approve some bike lanes. And I noticed in the staff report, it said that Sandag makes these bike lanes for, $13 million or 15, whatever it was per mile. But these other
Wow.
agencies can do it for 10 or 12. And I was like, why are we doing any of them if it costs that much? But I asked the question, I said, okay, so if we don't approve this item, we're going to lose $130 million that the state or the feds, whoever has given us. That's $130 million. How much money are we planning on spending for bike lanes? And what is the goal? How many people do we want to get out of a car and onto a bike lane? Don't you think we should have goals if we're going to be spending all this money? And it was like, well, if we don't, people will die. That was literally the answer I got. And it's so funny, it's funny and it's not. I'm in the minority party at Sandag. So it's not like I can make changes if I don't have the majority. But myself, the mayor of San Marcos, the deputy mayor of Oceanside, we're all pretty good about trying to bring some of these things to light. But most people don't realize that your county transportation agency is making decisions that you don't know about that are going to affect every aspect of your life.
Wow. I'm not laughing at you or anything. I'm laughing at the fact that,
That it's insane.
well, that it's always so it's insane. I agree with that, but it's like when I found out that Nathan Fletcher was on the, an emerging leader in the World Economic Forum, and that there were other people on the county supervisors that were like working with Soros. Like, that wasn't an exaggeration. That was actually just true. And then you look at Sandag and I Googled it and you're like, whoa, SDGs, I know where that's from. Agenda 2030. I know what that is. And it's like, oh, that's just it. And that's just here. It's not some far off place. It's actually just here in this county, in this city. And your real battle is almost, I would imagine, daily, just speaking truth to power and speaking like, in these very bought arenas, like sometimes that common sense that just probably just bounces off and doesn't really get anywhere.
There is no common sense in these groups. And, last year, the chair, Nora Vargas, she's the chair of the board of directors of Sandag. It was announced she was going to go to Africa for a United Nations conference. And when she got back, there was no report given on what happened, what she signed, what she committed us to.
Insane.
There was zero information given. And that's the kind of thing. Agenda 30, it sounds like a conspiracy theory, but your local transportation agency is the one that's implementing all of it. And for Escondido, I'll give you a real example. You're familiar with East Valley Parkway. It goes from El Norte at the most eastern point, basically all the way to Palomar Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And I came across a plan to remove an eastbound lane and a westbound lane. They were going to take them away entirely and make them dedicated bus lanes.
Wow.
For all 13 people who ride the bus.
Wow.
And we put a stop to that one. But man, you really got to be paying attention because these regional transportation plans are thousands of pages long. Wow. And you've got to be paying attention.
It's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing to me because I think, and I appreciate you qualifying that, because you could take that phrase, when I make Escondido a better place, when I leave it, like, you could take that in so many directions. You could take it down in the microscopic level on how you deal with people on a day-to-day basis. But when you're playing in a major county like we are, and you're dealing with entities like Sandag that are literally not subservient to anyone besides somehow the United Nations, has no jurisdiction in the United States. Like, it's gnarly.
Are you familiar with the county's, I think it's called the Safe Neighborhood Initiative or something like that? It's really this push from their new gun violence prevention office. And on the consent calendar, for anybody that doesn't know, when you're in a meeting, you have your agenda, and the first portion of it is the consent calendar. And items on the consent calendar are approved all as one because they're considered routine and you don't discuss them. And I'm going through, and there's an item, mind you, this is the transportation agency. There's an item to give the county, a couple $100,000 to like explore gun violence. And I'm like, what is this? What are we doing here? But it just infects everything, man.
Wow.
And that's one area where I have no room to compromise is the Second Amendment, especially.
It's pretty remarkable. That's something that's actually going to be a team fun event in the next few weeks. We have a patient who's a ex-Navy SEAL, who basically that's what he does, is he trains people on personal defense, home defense, and it's crazy to think that alone could be perceived as like some sort of act of whatever, hate and violence, right? When in reality, it's just a Bill of Rights. And it's how we protect the First Amendment, which obviously was thrown to the wayside, over the last 4 years, but for, calculated over the last several decades. I'm curious, what is the world, maybe what is Escondido? You future pace 4 or 5 generations since you have that longevity here. What would be something that you would love to see made manifest that is an indicator that maybe your mission was somewhat successful?
A couple of things. I think, with respect to homelessness, reducing the amount of people you see on the sidewalks, and we're working on that. I've got a project that I hope to see come to fruition next summer. I mentioned Escondido is kind of historically a farming community, and we're one of the last cities in the county that really invests in agriculture. And I would love to see us embrace the agricultural roots that we have. And I'm working on another opportunity coming to us known as ag tech. It's agriculture technology. I'm bringing a whole new industry to the city of Escondido, and that'll be debated in the next couple of months, whether or not the city council wants to pursue that. But I think seeing things like that come to fruition. So when I leave, I can turn and say, look, I was a part of this. I was a part of this, and it has contributed to the city in, unmeasurable ways or measurable ways.
Could you share more about ag tech? Or is that something that,
Yeah. So check this out.
Is that like bioengineering and GMO foods? I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
So, we were approached by the University of California, their ag department, with a potential partnership with the city. 20 years ago, the city purchased some property on Quince for the purpose of economic development. And it's just been sitting vacant since then. I got the city council to approve a feasibility study to explore a relationship between us and University of California. That's due to come back like in the next 30 or 60 days. And then I will take that to the city council. If the council adopts that and is willing to pursue it, that agreement will make us eligible for all kinds of grants that will pay for the redevelopment of that property and create a physical hub for agriculture technology. That only exists in one other city in the entire state of California. And mind you, agriculture is a $2 billion industry just in San Diego County. Wow. It will be a physical hub for inventors, scientists, ag workers, technologists, all to be right here in the city of Escondido. We already host these quarterly ag tech meetings that have been pretty successful, but that would be step one. Once the wheels are rolling on that. Now, on the east side of town, do you know where the police department shooting range is? Okay, so if you're on Valley Parkway and you're headed east and you're on your way to Valley Center, you're about to go up the grade. If you look to the right, all of that land we own. I would love to see, whether it's citrus or avocados or cows or chickens or a mixture of all, just some sort of an agricultural center for the purpose of, making money for the city. I'm about to do a dedication for the new recycled water. I don't know if you know about that, but Escondido was smart several years back. They explored recycled water. So we're going to take all of the city's water, recycle it, in this new facility that's about to open. It's called the Purple Line. It starts kind of over in that general direction, but it's going to recycle our water and sell it to all the ag customers for a discounted rate.
Wow, I
And
love
it would
that.
just kind of tie all of this together.
I would say a big part of, what we believe at Future Generations is about like regenerative agriculture, right? It's
Dude,
about restoring the earth, and
you
that the whole kind of psyop of veganism and cows are destroying the planet is like so reverse and crazy that I love hearing a lot of this, especially if you're aligned with that.
did you ever watch the show Yellowstone?
Yeah, yeah,
Dude, I love Yellowstone. I'm watching it for the second time right now. But when John meets that vegan activist
yeah.
on his farm, and he says something to the effect of, we've stopped uh, living with the earth and we're living on it, and that is. I mentioned the debt and a couple other things. This is also one of the major issues.
Mm,
But regenerative farming, that's how we're supposed to be living, right?
yeah.
It's just this natural cycle that the earth has for us, where if we take care of it, it takes care of us. And unfortunately, the loudest voices are, climate change is an existential threat and all of that. And
Hmm.
it's just nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. We should be investing more in stuff like that.
If you are open to it, I have a really big network in the regenerative ag field.
Oh, they should be
Just
a part of this ag tech thing.
Yeah. Okay.
100%.
Okay. I would love to connect them. Some of them are actually here in North County, which is awesome.
Yeah,
So
I would love that.
yeah. So all the things that we've shared today, thank you. Like I knew it was going to be awesome. This is far better than I thought it was going to be. If you could leave the guests with one thing to take action on, what would it be?
One thing. Uh,
Yeah, I know. You
no,
can leave as many as you
I
want.
would say this. I'm new. I'm When I was campaigning, I did not have a shot at actually winning this race. I was young. I don't know if you know, I didn't go to college. I barely graduated high school. I don't have the experience, the political experience to be in this seat, but I do have a lot of life experience. And now that I'm here, it took me a minute to sort of get everybody's respect on both sides of the aisle for some of these people, that have been in power for 20 or more years. But I found that a lot of the success comes from being willing to work with people who may have extreme views, being willing
Yeah.
to listen to people and actually digest what they say without trying to force my opinions on them. And I think that that is missing from everything today. The person who believes in climate change and all of that, they're not a bad person. And I think the media and politicians want us to believe that they're our enemies. But we're all here. We're all human. We've got to learn to get along. And I think the biggest thing that I could say is learn to love your neighbor, man. I know you're kind of a religious guy. There's definitely an afterlife. There's definitely a God in heaven. And I want them to go there just as much as I want myself to go there. But we've got to recognize that, man, recognize that push to hate your neighbor and just ignore it.
And it's part of that calculated psyop, right? Like there's a lot of money, there's a lot of growing of campaigns by causing division, by causing polarization. And I'm not a Pollyannish type person. I'm very much like you. Like you got to be in the trench, you got to be in the weeds, and you got to be able to be in, especially if you're a leader, you got to be able to create a space where people not, I don't love the word just safe, right? But it's the ability to create a space where people actually just know the authenticity of who they are is actually welcome. And it may be just like when the whole kind of craziness of censorship and deplatforming and all the shadow banning of things, like people on the freedom of speech side were like, yeah, like cheering on that other people were being said. You're like, no, you're actually supposed to actually defend the speech of the people who are speaking the exact opposite of your opinion. It's the vulnerability that we have as a nation, as a free people, is recognizing that the freedom is actually for everybody, not just for the people that believe what you believe. And so for you to share that is a huge thing, because I think that's where you're coming from also. It's like the ability to then create relationship where there wasn't possibility for it, create listening, create understanding where there wasn't possibility for that before, is literally like, it is a founding principle of this podcast. It's something that we always said from the very beginning. We wanted to be able to kind of push through the hard places, that the way out is actually through those tough spots, but you don't get to those tough spots if you're just doing what that mob is already doing, right? If you're censoring people, if you're self-censoring yourself, that's a problem. If you're censoring other people, especially if they don't believe what you believe, that's crazy, right? That's awesome, man.
Yeah, right now, just real quick before we go, the county, I don't know if you saw, the city of San Diego, I think it is, working on their public comment portion of their meetings.
Yeah, this is great. This is great. Let's talk about this.
We shut this down at Sandag. Some of us shut this down because they were trying to do the same thing. They were trying to say that if you're a public commenter, you cannot talk bad about the organization staff. You can't curse. You can't threaten anybody. And I got to tell you something. I run the meetings here. People get crazy. They call you an asshole. They say the F word. They do all these things. Let them speak, right? That is one of the foundational principles of this nation is freedom of speech, freedom of expression. You can't shut that down, because once you shut that down, you shut down the communication altogether. And that's when shit hits the fan.
Mm-hmm. That's when everybody loses. And it's common sense, but it's also just, it's so normal today. Right? It's so normal. You watch it. You can see it in the presidential election, which we did not talk about. I'm surprised. We could talk about if you wanted to, because let's talk about that. I'm a little interested in your perspectives.
I can. I've got a hard out at 1:00, but I'm more than happy to. Or we could do this again soon.
Yeah, we could definitely do. We could do it on your show, right? Because you see it, right? People then for one blip of a second, they talk about unity. But it's actually just fake unity. It's actually just, a campaign unity.
Dude,
on the back end, it's like...
After the former president was almost assassinated, for the next several hours, they talked about unity. And then 24 hours later, it was, the dude's a threat to democracy. He's Hitler. He's a fascist. And that's what's driving all of this.
It's crazy, man. So how do people find you? How do people connect with you?
Walk into City Hall. You can find me here. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. It's just, if you just put in Dane M. White on any of those, you'll find me.
It's been awesome to tune in to some of your town halls. I love that you take advantage of things like social media in a way that's actually very much approachable. It's very authentic. It's very much as you shared on this podcast, as you shared on, the news, as you shared on many of the platforms that you've been on. That's something that I sincerely respect dearly about you, the fact that you show up as essentially the same person on virtually every platform, in person. You look people in the eye, you shake their hand, you do all the things that most normal humans would actually resonate with, and then you back it up with how you actually lead. And I love the fact that I came here at the same time as you took office. We kind of have the same... You have 5 generations, but the same kind of energy of just being in service to this community. I am deeply devoted to this region of the county. I've been a part of this county for almost 20 years now, and just being a resident in Escondido for the last 2 has just been a huge, huge blessing, knowing that my family is an amazing part of the county in a city that has so much longevity and so many deep, deep, deep roots that are just aligned with not only the values of this country, but also just so many generations of good people. As you probably know, I'm the clinic director of the Future Generations Clinic of Chiropractic. I wanted to invite those of you in the greater San Diego area to come check us out. We expect and experience miracles in our office every day, and would love for you to experience the same, as well as your family, especially your kids. This month, we're offering our new patient package for just $67 for podcast listeners. The offer retails at $349 and includes an in-depth consultation where our patients literally tell us we know more about their family's health in the first 15 minutes than virtually every doctor on their healthcare team combined. our state-of-the-art clinical workup, including insight nervous system scans, full spine digital x-rays, and a functional exam. We also include a full report of your results, a customized plan to realize your greatest health potential, as well as your first adjustment in our office. Check out the link in the show notes for all the details and claim the offer. Love and appreciate you all.